SUVs may dominate America's roads today, but not every model deserves to be remembered. Over the years, automakers have given us some of the most practical, stylish, and safe vehicles in history. But they've also delivered some truly baffling creations. Machines that left critics speechless, buyers confused, and dealerships scrambling to get them off the lot. These weren't just minor missteps. They were full-blown disasters that damaged reputations, lost companies millions, and in some cases, helped sink entire brands. Today, we're counting down 8 SUVs that simply should never have been built. From bizarre experiments that no one asked for, to bloated gas guzzlers that defined excess, to luxury crossovers that forgot what utility even meant. These are the cautionary tales of the SUV world. Buckle in, because some of the names on this list might shock you, while others will make you say, "Oh yeah, that thing." Number 8. Pontiac Aztek, 2001 to 2005. The Pontiac Aztek has become almost mythical in the world of automotive disasters. Even people who don't know cars recognize it as one of the ugliest vehicles ever made. Launched in 2001, the Aztek was supposed to be Pontiac's bold step into the future of crossover SUVs. Instead, it became a roll-in punchline, and one of the biggest reasons Pontiac itself didn't survive the 2000s. When the Aztek was first unveiled, GM hyped it as a lifestyle vehicle for adventurous young buyers. The marketing pitch was that this was the SUV for camping trips, tailgating, and extreme sports weekends. Pontiac even offered a bizarre range of accessories: a built-in tent that attached to the rear hatch, a sliding cargo tray, a cooler in the center console, and even a pump for inflating air mattresses. It was a Swiss Army knife of gimmicks. The problem? Almost nobody cared about the extras, because the Aztek looked like a cartoon gone wrong. The design was a disaster from the start. With its awkward proportions, sharp angles, and plastic cladding, the Aztek looked unfinished, as if 3 different vehicles had been fused together. Car and Driver famously described it as awkward from any angle, while Time magazine later crowned it one of the 50 worst cars of all time. Buyers who walked into dealerships were instantly turned off by the styling, no matter how practical the interior might have been. And practicality was the Aztek's only real strength. Underneath the polarizing body sat a fairly solid GM minivan platform, which meant decent cargo space and a roomy interior. But it also meant uninspiring handling, a clunky ride, and a lack of the ruggedness that SUV buyers wanted. Add in Pontiac's reputation for mediocre build quality at the time, and the Aztek had no chance of winning hearts once the initial curiosity faded. Sales numbers tell the story. GM projected they would sell around 75,000 Azteks a year. In reality, they sold barely 27,000 in its debut year, and the numbers only dropped from there. By the end of its run in 2005, Pontiac was moving fewer than 6,000 units annually. The vehicle that was supposed to rejuvenate Pontiac's image ended up dragging it down further. Ironically, the Aztek has found a strange second life in pop culture. Thanks to the hit TV series Breaking Bad, where it was driven by Walter White, the Aztek became symbolic of broken dreams and failed ambition, a perfect metaphor for its real-world reputation. Today, some enthusiasts collect them as kitschy oddities, but that doesn't erase the damage it did. The Aztek should never have been built because it was the wrong car at the wrong time, executed in the worst possible way. It promised adventure, but delivered embarrassment. It tried to be futuristic, but looked like a design school reject. And worst of all, it became the face of Pontiac's decline. For crash test experts, journalists, and everyday drivers alike, the Aztek stands as a glaring example of how not to design an SUV. Number 7. Chrysler Aspen, 2007 to 2009. The Chrysler Aspen is one of those vehicles that makes you wonder what the executives were thinking when they approved it. Launched in 2007, the Aspen was Chrysler's first attempt at a full-size SUV under its own brand name. On paper, it was supposed to bring a touch of luxury to Chrysler's lineup. In reality, it was little more than a rebadged Dodge Durango, saddled with terrible timing, poor identity, and a market that was collapsing right underneath it. When Chrysler rolled out the Aspen, the SUV boom of the late 90s and early 2000s was already showing signs of slowing down. Gas prices were climbing fast, and Americans were starting to think twice about feeding thirsty V8 engines just to haul kids to school. Into this environment, Chrysler decided the answer was a Durango in fancier clothes. The Aspen came with more chrome, a slightly more upscale interior, and a higher price tag. That was it. Mechanically, it was identical to the Durango. The problem was obvious. Why would anyone pay more for the Aspen when the Durango offered the same thing for less? Chrysler tried to market it as luxury, but when buyers compared it to true premium SUVs like the Cadillac Escalade, Lincoln Navigator, or even a fully loaded Chevy Tahoe, the Aspen looked like a pretender. The cabin wasn't bad, but it was hardly luxurious. Hard plastics, cheap switchgear, and uninspired design made it feel more like a rental than a premium family vehicle. And then came the gas crisis of 2008. With fuel prices hitting record highs, Americans fled from big, inefficient SUVs in droves. Sales of full-size SUVs collapsed, and the Aspen, with its poor fuel economy and lack of unique appeal, was left with nowhere to go. Chrysler's timing couldn't have been worse. Instead of attracting luxury buyers, the Aspen ended up as a slow seller gathering dust on dealer lots. The numbers tell the story. In its first full year, Chrysler managed to sell around 30,000 Aspens, a fraction of what GM or Ford were doing with their big SUVs. By 2009, sales had collapsed to just a few thousand units. Chrysler quietly killed the Aspen after just 2 model years, hoping nobody would notice the experiment had failed. But people did notice, and not in a good way. Automotive journalists criticized the Aspen as pointless, a badge engineering exercise with no real reason to exist. Buyers ignored it, and the few who did purchase one often complained that it felt dated the day it rolled off the lot. Why should the Chrysler Aspen never have been built? Because it was a solution to a problem nobody had. Chrysler didn't need a luxury SUV. It needed better small cars, stronger innovation, and financial stability. Instead, it wasted time and resources putting a new grille and some chrome trim on a Durango and trying to sell it as something it wasn't. The Aspen wasn't just forgettable, it was irrelevant. Looking back, the Aspen is remembered as a symbol of Chrysler's struggles during the late 2000s. It arrived at the wrong time, with the wrong pitch, in the wrong market. And while it never reached the infamy of something like the Pontiac Aztek, it stands as a clear example of an SUV that should have stayed on the drawing board. Number 6. Lincoln Blackwood, 2002. Some SUVs fail because of bad timing. Others fail because of poor engineering. And then there are those that fail because the very idea behind them never made sense in the first place. The 2002 Lincoln Blackwood checks all three boxes. On paper, it was supposed to be Lincoln's bold entry into the luxury truck SUV crossover space. In reality, it became one of the strangest, shortest-lived, and most ridiculed vehicles Ford ever produced. The Blackwood was essentially a Ford F-150 in a tuxedo. Lincoln took the reliable underpinnings of Ford's best-selling truck, slapped on a unique chrome grille, painted every single one in glossy black, and filled the interior with leather and wood trim. That part wasn't too unusual. Luxury pickups and SUVs were starting to emerge in the late 1990s. The Cadillac Escalade had proven that people were willing to pay more for comfort and prestige on top of utility. But then, Lincoln made a baffling decision. They designed the Blackwood to be a pickup that couldn't actually be used like a pickup. Instead of a normal open bed, the Blackwood had a carpeted, stainless steel-lined cargo box covered by a permanently attached, power-operated tonneau lid. The space was tiny, awkward, and totally impractical for hauling anything dirty, heavy, or large. It was basically a giant luxury trunk pretending to be a truck bed. Lincoln even restricted it to rear-wheel drive only, immediately eliminating a huge chunk of traditional truck buyers who wanted four-wheel drive capability. The price didn't help either. At nearly $52,000 in 2002, the Blackwood was one of the most expensive pickups on the market. Buyers looked at it and asked the obvious question: why spend Escalade money on a truck that can't haul or tow like a real truck? Critics tore it apart. Automotive journalists called the Blackwood a pickup for people who hated pickups. Sales were anemic from the start, with fewer than 4,000 units sold in its single model year. By the end of 2002, Lincoln quietly killed the experiment, never to return. It remains one of the shortest production runs in modern automotive history. The Blackwood's failure was so spectacular that it spooked Lincoln from attempting another pickup-style vehicle for years. Even when they eventually tried again with the Lincoln Mark LT in 2006, the memory of the Blackwood's flop still hung over the brand. So why should the Blackwood never have been built? Because it misunderstood both the SUV and truck markets at the same time. Truck buyers want capability. Luxury buyers want refinement. The Blackwood gave neither. Instead, it offered a flashy but deeply impractical compromise that no one asked for. It's a textbook example of what happens when a company builds a vehicle for a niche that doesn't exist. Today, the Lincoln Blackwood lives on as a punchline in car culture. It shows up on worst cars ever made lists, sometimes spotted at auctions as a curiosity for collectors who enjoy owning oddities. But its legacy isn't prestige or innovation, it's failure. The Blackwood was proof that sometimes the best thing a company can do is say no to a bad idea before it reaches the showroom floor. Number 5. Hummer H2, 2003 to 2009. Few SUVs in history have been as instantly recognizable or as polarizing as the Hummer H2. When it debuted in 2003, it was marketed as the ultimate status symbol, a civilian-friendly offshoot of the military-inspired Hummer H1. It screamed excess, power, and bravado. But underneath that macho image, the H2 was one of the most impractical, inefficient, and ultimately pointless SUVs ever produced. It's an SUV that, in hindsight, probably never should have been built. The H2 looked like a tank rolling down the street, and that was exactly the appeal for its buyers. Celebrities, athletes, and anyone wanting to make a statement snapped them up. But once the novelty wore off, the flaws became obvious. First, the fuel economy was atrocious. Official EPA estimates put the H2 at around 10 miles per gallon in the city and 12 on the highway. But in reality, many owners reported worse. With gas prices spiking in the mid-2000s, filling an H2 became an exercise in financial pain. Then there was the size. The H2 was massive on the outside, yet strangely cramped on the inside. Despite its bulk, interior space was disappointing, with a small third row that was barely usable. The cargo area wasn't impressive either, especially compared to competitors like the Chevy Suburban or Ford Expedition. It was a vehicle that wasted its dimensions, prioritizing looks over practicality. Critics didn't hold back. Environmental groups seized on the H2 as a symbol of reckless excess. Late-night comedians mocked it relentlessly. Car reviewers noted its poor handling, sloppy ride, and questionable build quality. It was more of a fashion statement than a functioning SUV, and the price wasn't cheap. Starting around $50,000 in 2003 and climbing higher with options, the H2 was competing with vehicles that offered far more comfort, refinement, and actual utility. The Cadillac Escalade and Lincoln Navigator delivered true luxury, while traditional SUVs like the Suburban provided real space and towing capability. The H2 didn't really excel in any category except, "Look at me!" The timing of the H2 was especially damaging. As gas prices surged in the mid-2000s and economic recession loomed, the H2 quickly went from being a celebrity toy to a public target. Sales collapsed, and by 2009, GM pulled the plug as part of its bankruptcy restructuring. The entire Hummer brand disappeared soon after, remembered more for controversy than capability. So why should the H2 never have been built? Because it embodied the worst stereotypes of the SUV boom: excessive, inefficient, impractical, and tone-deaf to real-world needs. It damaged GM's reputation, became a lightning rod for criticism, and left thousands of buyers with vehicles that aged poorly, both in performance and in public perception. Today, the H2 survives mostly as a relic of an era when bigger was seen as better, no matter the cost. Some enthusiasts still love them for their bold looks, but for most, the H2 is a reminder that an SUV should be more than a rolling symbol of excess. It should be useful, efficient, and safe. The H2 was none of those things. It was an automotive misstep on wheels, one that crash experts, environmentalists, and drivers alike agree should never have existed. Number 4. Cadillac Escalade EXT, 2002 to 2013. The Cadillac Escalade is one of the most famous luxury SUVs ever built, a true symbol of wealth and success in the early 2000s. But Cadillac didn't stop at the standard SUV. In 2002, they unveiled the Escalade EXT, a strange mashup of SUV and pickup that borrowed its design from the Chevrolet Avalanche. On paper, Cadillac probably thought it was expanding its luxury empire. In reality, the Escalade EXT turned into one of the most pointless vehicles GM ever produced. The problem started with identity. The Escalade SUV already had a loyal audience of buyers who loved its big, flashy styling and upscale interior. The Avalanche, meanwhile, was Chevrolet's experimental half-truck, half-SUV with a trick mid-gate that could fold down to extend cargo space. The Escalade EXT combined these two ideas, but in doing so, it created a product that answered a question nobody was asking. Who really wanted a $55,000 luxury pickup with a small plastic-covered bed? That bed was the first major issue. Just like the Avalanche, it was short, awkward, and impractical for real truck duty. Sure, you could fold the midgate to extend it, but then you were exposing your leather-lined cabin to dirt and dust. Truck buyers who actually needed capability scoffed at the EXT, while luxury buyers who wanted prestige and comfort found the truck bed unnecessary and out of place. Then there was the price. The Escalade EXT cost thousands more than the Avalanche, yet it offered almost nothing new except Cadillac's badge and interior trim. Mechanically, it was the same vehicle underneath. Critics tore it apart, calling it a luxury Avalanche and a novelty at best. Sales were never strong, averaging just a fraction of what Cadillac's standard Escalade SUV moved each year. As gas prices climbed in the mid-2000s and the economy soured, the EXT made even less sense. Its poor fuel economy, massive size, and awkward purpose left it stranded in no man's land. By 2013, Cadillac quietly discontinued it, focusing on the standard Escalade SUV, which remained a strong seller. Looking back, the EXT is often seen as the luxury pickup nobody asked for. It didn't appeal to truck buyers who wanted toughness and real utility. It didn't appeal to SUV buyers who wanted space and luxury without compromise. Instead, it ended up as a confused mix of both worlds. Too expensive to be practical. Too impractical to be premium. Why should the Escalade EXT never have been built? Because it diluted Cadillac's image with a gimmick. Instead of strengthening the Escalade's reputation as the ultimate luxury SUV, it created a side project that cheapened the brand's focus. It was a novelty vehicle, not a necessity, and its failure proved that even a powerful badge like Cadillac can't sell a product if it doesn't make sense. Today, the EXT is mostly remembered as a curiosity, a flashy, over-the-top experiment that briefly caught the eye of a few celebrities and novelty seekers, but failed to find a lasting market. It's a textbook example of how luxury automakers sometimes chase niches that don't exist, and why not every idea that looks clever in a boardroom should make it to the showroom floor. Number 3. Suzuki X90, 1996 to 1998. Every now and then, a car company builds something so bizarre that people spend decades asking, why? The Suzuki X90 is one of those vehicles. Launched in the mid-1990s, this two-door SUV coupe looked like a design sketch that accidentally escaped the studio. It was supposed to be Suzuki's quirky answer to the growing small SUV craze. Instead, it became a rolling punchline, one that sales numbers, critics, and history all agree should never have existed. The X90 was essentially a Suzuki sidekick underneath, but instead of keeping the practical four-door SUV body style that buyers wanted, Suzuki chopped it down into a strange coupe-like shape with just two doors and a removable T-top roof. Imagine a tiny sports car crossed with an SUV, but with none of the benefits of either. It sat high like a truck, but had only two cramped seats in the back. It had a roof that came off like a convertible, but looked awkward instead of fun. It had SUV ground clearance, but not enough space to carry much cargo. The design alone was enough to scare away most buyers. With its round, bug-like headlights and squat proportions, the X90 looked toy-like, almost as if it belonged in a cartoon rather than on an actual road. Car reviewers at the time struggled to even categorize it. Was it an SUV? A coupe? A novelty convertible? Nobody could agree. And worse, nobody wanted it. Performance didn't help. The X90's 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine made just 95 horsepower, leaving it sluggish on highways and underpowered on hills. Handling was clumsy, the ride was bouncy, and the interior felt cheap and cramped. For all its compromises, it offered none of the excitement of a sports car, nor the utility of an SUV. Buyers were baffled, and dealerships quickly learned they couldn't move them off the lot. Suzuki hoped to sell 20,000 units a year in the US, but in reality, they sold only about 7,000 over 3 years before pulling the plug in 1998. The X90 went down in history as one of the most spectacular flops of the 90s car market. To its credit, the X90 did find a second life, but not the one Suzuki wanted. Its quirky looks made it a favorite for Red Bull's promotional fleet in the early 2000s, when the company mounted giant cans of energy drink on the back and sent them to college campuses. That's right, the most memorable use of the X90 was as a moving soda advertisement. Why should the X90 never have been built? Because it solved a problem nobody had. Buyers wanted affordable small SUVs with practicality, not a two-door oddball that confused everyone. It failed to attract sports car buyers, SUV buyers, or convertible buyers, meaning it had no natural audience at all. It was a car that existed only because someone at Suzuki thought different automatically meant better. Today, the X90 is remembered as one of the strangest SUVs of all time. You'll occasionally spot one at car shows, often surrounded by curious spectators shaking their heads in disbelief. Some collectors seek them out as ironic oddities, but that doesn't erase the reality. The X90 was a flop that wasted Suzuki's time, money, and credibility in the US market. It stands as a reminder that just because an automaker can build something doesn't mean they should. The Suzuki X90 is proof that being unique isn't always the same as being good. And in this case, it was downright terrible. Number 2. Dodge Nitro, 2007 to 2012. The Dodge Nitro is one of those SUVs that seemed doomed from the very moment it hit showrooms. Launched in 2007, it was Dodge's attempt to break into the crowded mid-size SUV segment with something bold, boxy, and different. What buyers got instead was a cheaply built, awkwardly styled, and poorly executed vehicle that quickly became one of the most forgettable flops of its era. To this day, the Nitro stands out as an SUV that simply should never have been built. At first glance, the Nitro looked tough. Its squared-off design, oversized fender flares, and aggressive grille gave it a muscular presence that seemed to scream rugged. Dodge's marketing leaned heavily on this image, pitching the Nitro as a macho alternative to bland crossovers. But once people got behind the wheel, the illusion shattered. Beneath its blocky styling, the Nitro was built on the same basic platform as the Jeep Liberty, and while Jeep leaned into off-road capability, Dodge tried to sell attitude without substance. The result was an SUV that looked the part but couldn't deliver. Performance was underwhelming from the start. The base engine, a 3.7-liter V6 with 210 horsepower, felt sluggish in a vehicle of its size and weight. Even the optional 4.0-liter V6 didn't do much to improve matters, and fuel economy was abysmal, averaging around 15 miles per gallon city and 21 miles per gallon highway. Handling was clumsy, the ride was harsh, and road noise was intrusive, all of which made long drives exhausting instead of enjoyable. Inside, things were no better. The Nitro's interior was filled with hard plastics and cheap finishes that made it feel outdated even when it was new. Reviewers at the time criticized the seats for being unsupportive and the overall cabin design for being uncomfortable and uninspired. For an SUV meant to compete with well-rounded family vehicles like the Honda CR-V, Toyota RAV4, or Ford Escape, the Nitro came across as crude and unrefined. Reliability didn't save it either. Owners complained about chronic issues with transmissions, electrical components, and interior trim falling apart prematurely. The Nitro quickly developed a reputation for being a headache to own. Add to that Dodge's spotty customer satisfaction ratings during that period, and the Nitro had little chance of building long-term trust with buyers. Sales started out modest, with Dodge moving about 70,000 units in its first year. But as word spread about its shortcomings, sales collapsed. By the early 2010s, fewer than 20,000 were selling annually, and Dodge finally pulled the plug after the 2012 model year. Unlike some SUVs that develop cult followings after being discontinued, the Nitro simply faded into obscurity. So why should the Nitro never have been built? Because it was all show and no go. It promised toughness but offered mediocrity. It pretended to be rugged but lacked off-road chops. It tried to look bold but ended up cheap and awkward. Instead of adding value to Dodge's lineup, it distracted from stronger products and left a stain on the brand's credibility. Today, the Nitro is rarely remembered except as a cautionary tale of the mid-2000s SUV craze. When it does show up on used car lots, it's usually priced low, and for good reason. Most buyers know better. It's not collectible, it's not admired, and it's not missed. The Dodge Nitro remains a prime example of a vehicle that existed because a company thought attitude alone could sell cars. History proved otherwise, and the Nitro's legacy is one of failure. Number 1. Nissan Murano CrossCabriolet, 2011 to 2014. If there's one SUV that deserves the crown for what were they thinking, it's the Nissan Murano CrossCabriolet. Built between 2011 and 2014, this strange convertible SUV tried to merge two completely different worlds: the practicality of a crossover and the fun of a convertible. Instead, it gave us one of the most confusing, impractical, and ridiculed vehicles of the modern era. Simply put, the CrossCabriolet is the definition of a car that should never have been built. The idea behind it sounded bold in theory. Nissan wanted to offer something unique, an SUV with open-air driving appeal. Take the successful Murano, lop off the roof, install a fabric soft top, and voila, the world's first mass-market convertible crossover. But the execution was a disaster. Removing the roof destroyed the Murano's clean proportions, leaving behind an ungainly body with a stretched, awkward look. The rear seats became cramped, the trunk shrank to a laughable size, and the soft top gave the SUV a lumpy profile that critics instantly mocked. Functionality took the biggest hit. The Murano was originally loved for its practicality and decent cargo space. The CrossCabriolet eliminated that entirely. The trunk was barely large enough for groceries, and with the top folded down, space disappeared almost completely. The SUV's structural rigidity also suffered. Even with reinforcements, reviewers complained about body flex and a sloppy ride compared to the standard Murano. It wasn't sporty, it wasn't practical, and it certainly wasn't stylish. Then there was the price. Starting at around $46,000 in 2011, the CrossCabriolet cost nearly $20,000 more than a base Murano. For that premium, buyers got worse practicality, awkward styling, and a feature nobody had asked for. Critics panned it relentlessly, with Car and Driver famously calling it the answer to a question nobody asked. Sales were abysmal, with Nissan moving just a few thousand units a year. By 2014, the company quietly killed the model, pretending it had never happened. The CrossCabriolet also became a cultural punchline. Late-night hosts roasted it, car reviewers joked about it, and even casual drivers couldn't help but laugh when they saw one on the road. Its sheer absurdity overshadowed any of its minor positives, like the fact that it came standard with all-wheel drive and leather seats. Those details couldn't save a concept that was fundamentally flawed. So why should the Murano CrossCabriolet never have been built? Because it ignored everything buyers actually wanted. SUV owners crave practicality, cargo room, and utility. Convertible owners crave style, fun, and sportiness. The CrossCabriolet delivered none of the above. It was heavy, awkward, expensive, and completely out of touch with market demand. It confused truck buyers, alienated SUV buyers, and embarrassed convertible enthusiasts. Today, the CrossCabriolet is remembered as one of the strangest cars of the 21st century. You'll occasionally see one pop up online as a meme or curiosity, often accompanied by sarcastic captions like, "The rarest SUV nobody wants." A handful of collectors scoop them up for their novelty factor, but most people avoid them entirely. In the end, the Murano CrossCabriolet stands as a shining example of what happens when automakers chase uniqueness without considering logic. It's quirky, yes, memorable, sure, but it's also a disaster that drained Nissan's credibility and money. If there's one SUV that truly should never have existed, it's this one. And there you have it. 8 SUVs that never should have made it past the drawing board. From the Aztek's legendary ugliness to the CrossCabriolet's baffling roofless experiment, these vehicles prove that even the biggest automakers sometimes get it spectacularly wrong. Some were victims of bad timing, others of bad design, and a few were doomed the second the idea left the sketchpad. The lesson? Just because you can build something doesn't mean you should. Which one shocked you the most? Did you ever own one of these oddballs? Or maybe see one parked in your neighborhood and wonder who bought it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the best, worst, and weirdest vehicles ever made.